So I will pass things off to Ariana.
Great. Thanks, Marina. So I'll just do a little intro and then we'll dive in. I'm Ariana. Let me see. This might be more fun if I just share from my first one. I graduated from PSU in 2010. Let's see. Hold on. Okay. Actually, let me get started here. I'm going to pop out while I fix my thing. I graduated in 2010 and really didn't know much about getting my license and also really did not care about it. Luckily, I had coworkers who all did. I started working at the VA right away, and then I didn't start the licensing process till probably March of the next year, so I waited a while. And then I really didn't understand the purpose of clinical social work, and I mostly received clinical supervision, and then I mostly received clinical supervision that was like supportive counseling. So it was good, but now in retrospect, I realize there's so much potential for clinical growth while you get your supervision. So about 5 years ago, I started doing clinical supervision or providing it. And then I started a private practice, and that's what my private practice specializes in is clinical supervision. And then I love business for some reason. I don't know why, but social work and business are like my passions. So I also end up helping a lot of people start a private practice or grow their practice. It's pretty fun. So let me just jump in. There's a lot of information. I'm going to try and remember it all, but I'm not going to. So I have notes. If you have questions, we'll get your questions answered. So don't worry if we don't have the answer right away. And also, I was looking over Randy's PowerPoint this morning from the Oregon board, and I was like, it brought up so much anxiety. So if you feel that as we're talking, that's totally normal. But this is like a doable process. It's just going to be a lot of information at once, but it's totally doable. So with that said, I'm going to start my presentation. Okay. Let's have a screen share and then going to present. I'm going to do that.
I'm going to try to figure out how to turn off that bell noise. So
I don't know if you'll be able to because I think it's in the meeting settings.
I think I might be able to. We'll see.
Yeah, if you can. Yeah. Otherwise, it's very friendly. All right. Okay. So let's go into present. And if you can't see this, let me know. So what you're looking at right now is a training for getting your license in Oregon. And this is geared towards people who have no license at all. So it's not geared towards folks coming from a different state or in any other situation. Let's see, I already did my intro. My website's right here. You can check it out. I have posts on my website about how to get your CSWA, how to get your LCSW, how to get your license in Washington once you have your Oregon one, and a few other things. Let's see. So the process of obtaining an LCSW is 2 parts. And most people just look at the mechanical part. So I really want to give you a clinical framework for it today too. So that you feel like you kind of have a whole view on how it works. So it's clinical, it's mechanical, and we're going to go through all of that together. And normally I present this in person, so it's a bit more questions and answers. But I think we'll just kind of go through it without the feedback, unless people really feel compelled to answer. But I like people to think about why they want an LCSW. For some people, it's the next natural step. For some people, it's so you can start a private practice. Others, it creates mobility. But I want you to think about why you want one and what it means to you. So let's see, the purpose of an independent license. You'll see on the next slide, but the independent, we didn't used to have licenses for social work, and they came about to protect the public and also to create a certain level of expectation and skill around being a social worker. So I want you to think about what it represents to you, why it matters to you. We'll do a few more questions like that. Let's see. So the Oregon Board, Oregon State has a board of licensed social workers, and they regulate all the licenses. And everything you do in regards to calling yourself a social worker and being able to practice as a social worker will go through them. So they set the minimum standards, and they also hold people accountable. So if there's any complaints, any problems, it runs through them. They're the governing board. They are there to protect the public. They are not there to advocate on your behalf. They will help you understand the requirements and help you work through them, but they are a governing body to protect the public from any of us acting in an unethical way, whether by mistake or intentionally. Do you need a license? So in the state of Oregon, you cannot call yourself a social worker even with your master's degree unless you have a license that's issued by the board. And this can be the RBSW, which is just for folks with their bachelor's, so we're not going to talk about that one today. It can be the LMSW, which we will talk about briefly, the CSWA, and the LCSW, which the latter two are what we'll mostly focus on. You can read number 2. Number 3, protects your profession. Social workers are the number 1 providers of mental health services in the US. So more social workers than psychologists and marriage and family therapists, than psychiatrists. More than all of those numbers, it's social workers that are providing the services. So it's a really important position, and it's valuable to protect it so that people know when they are working with a clinical social worker, there's high expectations. Let's see. So I want you to just take a moment of reflection here and to think about what you expect when you're working with an LCSW. Are you expecting diagnosing? Are you expecting a certain level of assessment? Are you expecting a certain kind of therapy? What have you formulated in your mind? And it's helpful to think about this because most of us have some kind of unconscious expectations. And it's really helpful to come up with an intentional image of what we believe an LCSW is or should be. Let's see. What does your best clinical self look like? We'll get into this a little bit more. And then what is deliberate practice? So this period of time from now when you graduate, or if you already have graduated, until you're practicing independently, I really like to think of it as like an incubation period. Or if you were in medical school, it'd be your residency or an internship. But it's this period of time where you get a lot of hands-on support, a lot of built-in support, and you get to practice your skills in a really deliberate way. So I'm going to lead you to this page on my website that I like to have people check out. And you'll see right here, there's a theory, which hopefully you've already heard of in grad school. I never did, but hopefully you have. It's the common factors theory, and it basically says that across all evidence-based modalities, there are specific factors that create therapeutic change. So regardless of whether you're doing DBT or motivational interviewing, internal family systems theory, or like EMDR, there's specific qualities and skills that you need to have in place to make them effective. And without those qualities and skills, the therapy itself will not stand. It will not create change. So you can see on this wonderful graph here across the bottom, the width of the bars indicates the numbers of the studies that have been done. but it talks about goal consensus, empathy, alliance, positive regard, specific features to you, congruence, cultural competency and expectations. And then over here on the right side, the specific factors are the actual therapy modalities that you choose. And research shows that the people who focus on these contextual model factors, the common factors, and who deliberately practice them, who are aware of them, who get feedback on their work, who really address the places where you fall short and strengthen them and improve them, those people end up being the best therapists and providing the best services. I always tell the people that I supervise that the best therapists get the most amount of negative feedback, and it's because they're asking for it. So supervision is this wonderful opportunity to do deliberate practice, to get really, really good at your core foundation of skills with a lot of good built-in support. Any questions so far of kind of the framework that I'm offering to you as a way to approach your clinical supervision? Okay.
And I'm seeing any questions in the chat, so we're good.
Okay. Thanks, Marina. So this is just like a little sketch of what you know now, what you need to know to be an LCSW, and then the licensing process, the supervision. So it's really just this nice supportive time that most of us, once we finish it, we really miss the time when it was built in. And then a lot of us end up doing this ongoing consultation throughout our entire careers so that we keep improving. So I really want to communicate that getting your license is equal parts this clinical piece and then the mechanical piece, which we'll jump into.
Ariana, there's a quick question in the chat asking if you could please repeat what you said about the best therapists often getting the worst feedback.
So what I tell people is the very best therapists get the most amount of negative feedback. And it's because they are eliciting it. They're constantly checking in with their clients and saying, hey, what in this hour that we just spent together, what worked and what didn't work? How did we use our time that you thought was valuable and what was not valuable? Or right now, I know some therapists are getting a lot of feedback of like, you're too close to the camera, you're too far away, or I'd love if you listened more or talked more. So the best therapists, the best clinicians, even if you're not doing therapy, are saying, hey, what's working for you here and what's not working, and let me know. Let's keep working on this together.
Thank you.
So we're going to move into we covered the clinical part, and we're going to move into the mechanics of getting your license. And I sped through that first part, so we'll see how the second part goes. But feel free to ask questions along the way. So the mechanics. How do I become an LMSW? So you do not need to become an LMSW. And the reason you would choose to become one is if you are not planning to get your independent clinical social work license. You're not planning to do your LCSW, but you still want to be able to call yourself a social worker. This would be for folks who are just going to go straight on an administrative track, or maybe just develop nonprofits, or anything where you're not providing direct clinical services. Then you do need an LMSW if you want to call yourself a social worker. Otherwise, you can say, I graduated with my social work degree, but my job is A, B, and C. And to get an LMSW, it's similar to an LCSW, so I won't spend too much time on it, and most people don't end up doing this. So if you have questions about this, let me know, but we're going to just kind of skim over it. So you do need your master's, and you'll need to take the National ASWB exam, which you've probably all heard about. Everybody who gets their LMSW or LCSW takes it. Most folks don't take it for 2 or 3 years after they graduate. You need a passing score on the board's rules and laws exam, which I'll go into in a bit because it's also part of the CSWA license. You'll need to do your background check, of course, and you'll pay your fees. So it's not easy to get an LMSW, and it's not cheap. So you don't need to get it unless for sure you're not doing clinical social work. Any questions about this piece?
I was just going to add, this is Marina, that for any students that do want to talk about just like the pros and cons of doing LMSW or kind of what it's used for or anything like that, I'm always happy to meet with students or talk with students about LMSW questions. I'm not as familiar with LCSW questions, which is why I bring in the experts, but LMSW I feel pretty competent to talk about with students. So reach out.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know any LMSWs. So Marina, you probably have
very few, which is part of my feelings around the LMSW. So I can talk more later.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I want you to understand that the getting a license is basically 4 straightforward steps, and they're involved, but I want you to know like the overview so that you kind of understand the basics. First step is getting your CSWA, which we'll go into. The second step is engaging in supervision. The third is completing your hours. So step 2 and step 3 go together. And then the fourth, which you do after the first 3 steps. The fourth step is passing the national exam. So we're going to go through each of those steps. The first is getting your CSWA. So I put these in the order that would be good to do them. So doing your fingerprints the fingerprints are probably the longest piece of getting your CSWA because the state has to run a background check on you. I spoke with all of the information I'm sharing with you today. I ran it through Randy Harnish, who's the executive director, I believe, of the Oregon Board of Licensed Social Workers. At least he's the guy in charge. I don't know if he's the ED or has a different title. So he said, I asked if people are still doing fingerprints right now, and he said there's limited availability, but that field print is still doing the fingerprints, and that they still request that you go through a field print. They don't want people sending in like their own inked versions that they've ordered somewhere online and sent in. So you can go through field print and fingerprints, and you'll send all of this to the board's physical address, which I'll show you in a bit. It's on all their forums and their website too. Second would be your transcript request, which is you send in to PSU or to wherever you graduated from. And every university has like a certain process, but it's pretty straightforward. C is you complete the Oregon Statutes and Administrative Rules exam. There's an M at the end of this. Luckily, there's no exam on that one right there. I will show you how to do that. It's an open book test. It does require you getting online, printing out the questionnaire, going to the Oregon Secretary of State and reading through different statutes to answer the exam. It's a pain. It's a little bit tedious. There's no quick way to do it, but I'll show you where it's at on the website. And then you send that in to the board as well. You will have to repeat that every 5 years. So I recommend saving your answers like on a Google Drive or something so you have them. I don't know if the board approves of that, but that's what I do. The first few steps take a while to do. And then you do the application, which I'll show you, and the fee. The application is moving online in July. So we're in May right now. Randy said they will still take paper applications, but if you're right on the cutoff, they prefer you just wait and do it online. Because if you do a paper version, let's say in 3 weeks or so, or in a month, you're going to have to redo it online anyway. The application form and the supervision plan and place of employment, those go together. So it's okay if you do A, B, and C and then just have the board hold it. People hold it, I think, for a few years, those first few steps. So they'll hold it. Don't worry about them not holding onto your information. While you're getting your job, you're figuring out your supervision, and you're filling out the application. So I'm going to go through these steps. And then at the end of me going through them, let me know if you have questions, okay? Let's see. Oh, also I wanted to know on my website, which I can put a link to this, but I go through each of these steps in a little bit more depth. I have like links to the application. I have the link to the field print, Oregon for the fingerprints. I have the link for the Oregon statutes and administrative rules. But we're also going to check out some of this together today. Let's see what else we've got. Okay, so I wanted to go through the application together briefly. And remember that you'll likely do this online, so it might look a little bit different. But I still want you to be familiar with what it looks like, and also just see that it's pretty straightforward. So we'll see how long my computer takes to load it.
Ariana, as that's loading, one question that did come in, which I don't know if you want to address now or maybe later, but a student is moving to a new state in the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Should they start the first 3 steps that you outlined here, or should they wait until they move to the state?
People always ask that question. It depends on if you're going to work here or not. If you are going to work in Oregon as a social worker and then transfer your hours and everything to the next state, then I would start on this. And what I would do is, if I know where I'm moving, I would figure out the other states' requirements too and see if you can do it concurrently, or at least make sure that the way you're doing the Oregon one will match the states that you're going to, because most states have their own requirements. Some states do reciprocity, but a lot of states have their own set of requirements. For example, Washington State requires that your supervisor have, I don't even know, like 5 more years of supervision and maybe like 30 hours of training, versus Oregon only requires 6 hours of continuing ed credits. So if you knew for sure, hey, I'm going to be working in Washington in 2 years, then you would want to pick a supervisor here in Oregon that matches Washington's requirements. So a lot depends on how quickly you're moving, what the state's requirements are where you're moving, and if you're wanting to practice here or not. But a lot of hours can be transferred if you just check out the other state's requirements first. There is a risk of losing some of your hours. That is a risk. But you could always complete your Oregon license fully, even though you move. And then at some point, a lot of people that I know end up doing this. If you start a private practice, you'll still be able to provide services for people in Oregon. So there's some benefit to continuing it either way.
Thank you.
Okay. So this is what your application looks like. It'll be all online soon. And you'll have basically a portal and it'll walk you through it. So I'm really excited for things to move online. I think it'll be bumpy for a few months, maybe more. And then it'll just make this so much easier. I'm licensed in Oregon and Washington. Washington's entire process is online and it's much, much easier. So you'll go in, you'll give your demographic information. That's page 1. Page 2, you're going to mark which license you want. You're doing your CSWA. I know it makes sense that you do your LCSW, but you just do that at the end. So you're just going to do your CSWA. There's always the question people have about, can I apply before I have an employer? So you can do that, and then update the board once you have an employer. That's fine to do. I think it's simpler to wait because they're not going to approve it until you actually have the employer and the supervision plan So it's best to wait, but some people just want to send all their information in just to get it going. Here's the part where you send in your transcript directly from your university. Let's see, any previous employment. The board in general, from what I've seen, part of this is your background check, but they don't really seem to be too concerned about what employment you put. So you could put a paid internship if that feels useful, anything that's relevant. You don't need to go back too far on employment. Let's see, what else have we got here? Previous employment. This is for part of the background check. They're the questions you're going to get every few years from the board. You'll get it again when you go for your license. For me, every time I renew my license, which is every 2 years, I do these questions again. They're basically checking to see if you've been arrested for anything, if you've gotten fired, if you've had anything brought against you in DUIs. You'll see down here, reprimanded, suspended, restricted from practice, having your licensure restricted, under any disciplinary action. So if you do check yes on one of these, then the board's going to have you provide additional information. In fact, they do say yes here at the top. Use a separate sheet of paper to explain what happened. So I've had people that I supervise that have spent like decades in prison. So they, of course, had to check yes. And then what the board had him do was get like reports from the places they spent time in prison. I have other people that have had DUIs, so they contact the court, but the board will walk you through what you need to do. There might be a spot on here. I don't see it, but they do check and see if you've had any psychiatric hospitalizations as well. They want to make sure that you're feeling stable enough to do the practice, to do the work. Let's see what else have we got. Oh yeah, it's down here. So any court proceedings, any inpatient treatment, any serious medical conditions. So they want to make sure that you're not so impaired that it impacts your work. And here's the part about the background check, your plan of supervision.
Ariana, before you go into the plan of supervision, there's one quick question around in the previous employment section.
Yes.
Are you able to put like your field placements, or does it have to be paid employment?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I should double check with the board. I think I've had people put their field placements on there. I'll put that in my notes to double check on though. So after this training, what I'll do is all the questions that I don't know for sure on, I'll find out from the board, and then I'll send everyone a follow-up email. Or actually what I'll do is probably send it to Marina, and she'll send everyone the follow-up email. You're welcome to, I can also send it to you directly if that's helpful. Field placements. Let me just make a note here. But yeah, I think people do put it on there. Let's see. Supervision requirements. So the next section of our work together is about supervision. But let me just jump into one thing before we get there. So, temporary CSWA. Some of you may have heard about temporary CSWAs. They used to be super important. When I was getting licensed, they didn't matter 10 years ago. But for some reason, about 5 years ago, a lot of employers started to say, hey, we can't hire you unless you have your CSWA. And then obviously there's a problem because you can't get your CSWA unless you have a place of employment and a supervisor. So there's this gap developed. So what the board did as a solution to that was they gave people a temporary CSWA, which was a temporary license number that allowed employers to hire someone, and then that person, of course, would follow through and get their full CSWA. So what I I want you to know is that most places do not require a CSWA license before they hire now. Places have stopped doing that. So it's not, the temporary CSWA is not a license to practice. You cannot practice with it. It only holds for 180 days. And if it expires, let's say you were like, you know what, I know they're not that relevant, but I want to get it, makes me feel more comfortable. It expires after 180 days and then you pay again. So if you didn't have employment by then, or maybe you got sick, or if you traveled, you'd have to pay again, and it's not cheap. So I spoke with the board this morning, and they said, we really, really want people to understand that we don't want you to get the temporary CSWA, and don't even consider it unless your potential employer requires it. Even if they require it, call the board and run it through the board. And what might happen will be the board calling the employer and saying, hey, are you sure you really need this? Do you understand what it is? So I'm guessing they'll move away from them entirely. They used to be like what everybody did. Now it's the opposite. But are there any questions on the temporary CSWA before we move into the whole part of supervision? Or about this CSWA application, not just the temporary CSWA, but about the application itself?
There was one question that said, if we have an employer that will let us start working as soon as the board has approved our CSWA, can we apply pre-graduation with the paper application, or do we need to wait until it goes online in July?
No, you could apply with the paper application and with the employment information and with the supervision. You can do that. You don't have to wait for it to move online, but there is going to be this like month where paper applications are going to pile up, and then they're going to have you redo the online part. So Randy, the director, was just saying, hey, we want you to be really aware of this and try and time it out if you can. But if you have employment right now, I would definitely apply for the CSWA right now. That's a good question. The timing of applying is always something that makes people nervous. Any other questions about that? So that reminds me that at the very end, I'm going to show you the website, and I want to show you where the approvals for the CSWA are, and I also want to show you where the board meeting info is, because the board meets once a month to do the CSWA approvals. And people get nervous when they haven't heard back from the board for a few weeks. But the average time, depending on when they just had their meeting and when you get your application in, the average wait time is about 30 days. Any other questions about the application for the CSWA, how to get your CSWA, or about a temporary CSWA?
Not a question per se, but I do know there's someone on the call who had the experience of applying for their CSWA and is open to just sharing some tips.
That's great. Yeah. Do you want me to stop screen sharing?
No, I think it's fine. I think they'll just talk over.
Hey,
okay.
This is Thomas. I just wanted to say that thanks so much for all the information about the CSWA. A couple things that I thought was really interesting is there are still some jobs. It's really great to hear that they're moving away from the temp CSWA, but particularly in medical social work, I found that some folks were like really insistent, like their systems were just set up to need a CSWA. And one of the things that was an interesting challenge that I ran into was the timing of when they review those. So I was like applying for jobs and then trying to set up a CSWA, and then they only reviewed them, I think, once a month. And if you like didn't hit that timing, you had to wait another month. And like sometimes offers would be like held out until you could get your CSWA. And so just something to be aware of that timing. You don't always have a ton of control over it. And it's good to know too that your recommendation about reaching out to the board directly to see if there might be some wiggle room from organizations that are pretty firm about the need for a CSWA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Was it Thomas?
Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, so I'm really glad that you brought that up about I've heard it's more for the medical field, like medical social work, which is too bad. The board did say that, let's say Thomas was offered a job and the place is like, we need your license number within a week. The board said to give them a call, tell them that, and that in some extenuating circumstances, they can move it along, even if they just had the meeting. So they said they really want to be accommodating and flexible and to reach out in those kinds of situations. And I'll give you 2 good email addresses and a phone number at the end of people at the board. I would hate for anyone to be in that position where you don't get the job you want because you don't have this number, this license number. Anything else? Any other comments or questions? Okay, so I'm going to assume that you understand how to get the CSWA. And now we're at the place in your life where you have the CSWA and you're figuring out supervision. Actually, we're kind of at the middle place where you're doing the CSWA application still, but you understand the nuts and bolts. But you're filling out the supervision plan. That's where we're at mentally. So I think I want to go back and look at the supervision plan. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about supervision. In fact, I think I do have a slide, but yeah, we'll just look at the supervision plan and then I'll move forward with the slide. Okay, so supervision requirements. When you do supervision, and I'll get into the numbers about it and some of the other stuff. When you do supervision, you need individual supervision and you need group supervision. Well, group supervision is optional, but it helps you get your hours faster. And most people really love group supervision because you get so much support from peers. So it really helps with like decreasing isolation, helping you learn other resources more quickly, learn about other jobs, and just kind of increase your support with your people. I'll go into hours for both of these. You can have the same person be your individual as your group. You can have 2 different people do it. You do need a minimum of 2 hours of supervision a month and at 2 separate times. So lots of groups will run for 2 hours straight. So that wouldn't meet the requirement because they were at the same time. You would still need another session. Some people want to do a bunch of their hours together, so they'll do 2 groups a month. I'd say the average person does 2 individual sessions a month at 2 different times and 1 group session a month. If you do just the minimum requirement of 2 hours a month, it'll take you 4 years to get your license. So people usually try to do 4 hours a month, 2 individual, 1 group for 2 hours. Your groups can be other social workers up to 5 people. It can also sometimes include somebody who's working on their licensed professional counseling degree or license, which is really fun, or like a marriage and family therapist intern who's working on their license. So it's really fun to kind of have different professions. And you'll have your people sign here. You'll have your individual, your group. If they're the same person, we'll sign both. If not, you'll take this plan and have both of them sign it separately. You'll have your administrative supervisor sign it, which I'll get into, and you'll have yourself sign it. Let's see, they also sign off on what they're doing. And I'll get a bit into what your supervisor does. And it's different based on whether your supervisor is on site where you work or if you hire someone in the community, which is what I do. If they're on site, they might be signing every single chart note that you write. If they happen to be your administrative supervisor and clinical supervisor, they might be signing your paychecks or signing off on your paychecks. They will be checking your competency. You will be doing case consultations with them. They'll be reviewing ethics with you. They'll be signing 6-month reports with you, which I'll go over. And they'll let the board know if there's any concerns, but they should let you know first if there's any concerns. So everybody signs a supervision plan and initials it, and then it's approved through the board. So you can see down here, it's not approved until they have these things: the background check, completed application, transcript, and your fees. So this is what you'll do for your application. There's a few more pages, but these are for out-of-state people. When you do your initial application, you'll do these first 10 pages. So I'm going to move back into this PowerPoint here. Okay. We talked about the temporary CSWA. We're going to move into supervision, which covers a little bit more of the supervision plan. You'll need 100 hours of supervision. 50 hours must be an individual. So you can do group, but you have to have at least 50 an individual. They need to be at separate times. Ideally, you see someone every week. That would be best. And like I said, common is 2 individual month, 1 group a month. You can do video supervision. Right now, of course, all supervision is by video. But when we're not in a global pandemic, the video supervision, you just need to do your first supervision session, your last supervision session, and at least once quarterly supervision sessions in person. But otherwise, the rest can be by video. A lot of people I work with, before this was all happening, love doing video supervision, because then you could do it during your workday, or you could do it from home. It just makes it so much easier. Other people that I supervise don't want to do any supervision but in-person supervision. So figure out what works for you and make sure that's what your supervisor can provide. A big piece of supervision you'll find is finding a supervisor whose work schedule matches yours. It seems really obvious, but that's pretty important. It's making sure that their work schedule matches yours, that they're consistent, that you can get a hold of them when you need to. Ideally, if you're like having a really big problem at work, you can reach them that day. Availability is such an important part of supervision, so that you never feel like you're doing your work all alone, but you always feel like you have at least one safety net. All right, supervision plans. We just went over that. They have to be approved before you can start practicing as a CSWA. They have to be approved before you can count your hours at your place of employment, your clinical hours, and your supervision hours. I always encourage folks to use these plans as a clinical tool, instead of just kind of like a hoop to jump through, but also like something that guides your work, your deliberate practice. You update the board if there's any interruptions, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Administrative versus clinical supervisor. I did want to touch on that briefly. I wonder if I have another slide on here. So I really encourage, I don't think I do, so I really encourage people to, as much as possible, try and have a separate administrative supervisor from your clinical supervisor. There's so many reasons, and I'm sure you can see like why that's so important, but you really don't want the person who's keeping an eye on you, who's checking to make sure you put your treatment plan in just the right order, or who's meeting performance measures if you have to do those. The person who's kind of, just keeping an eye on you, you don't want that to be the same person who is supposed to be your nurturing, supportive clinical supervisor who you can feel completely vulnerable with, who you can come to and say, hey, I really think I messed this situation up, or I'm feeling really conflicted, or something about the agency culture is not working for me. You really need a separate space for that. I know that it's not always possible to have those separate, but if you can, try and have them separate. I really encourage people to negotiate supervision before you agree to take your job. That could be that you negotiate supervision happens during your work hours. Could be that you negotiate, it happens with someone other than your admin supervisor. Could be that you negotiate a stipend. A lot of places will give you a stipend to pay for your supervision.
Speaking of the payment piece, Ariana, there was a question around, do we pay for a supervisor for the help they are offering?
Yeah. So I'll show you a supervision contract. I wonder which I have that on. Oh, I think, I'm trying to think if I have it on the slide or a different one. I'll show you, but yeah, if you have an off-site supervisor, you'll pay for it. I didn't mean that to sound so threatening, but yeah, you'll pay for their services just like you would for a therapist. There's a range. Some supervisors will do very low. They'll offer like a very low sliding scale. The average supervisor probably charges between 75 and 100 for a 1 hour of supervision, and for group usually between maybe like 25 to 45 for 1 hour. So it's not cheap. So that's why I'd encourage to see if your work will help at all in any way, and really try and negotiate that, or at the very least let you do it on your work hours. So at least you're getting paid for your time while you're doing the supervision. And I feel like that's completely legitimate if your work's saying, hey, I want a master's level clinician, that they support you doing that clinical work. Let's see. That's also the reason, because you're paying for it and because your own practice and own development is so important in your career trajectory and also your satisfaction in your work. Be intentional in how you choose a supervisor. And I encourage folks to look at it like you would choose a therapist. A therapist, there's no like one size fits all. And it's the same with your supervisor. It needs to be somebody that you trust to be competent and to be flexible, someone that you feel completely safe with, and someone that you really know their values and their approach, and you agree with it, and you agree with the way they work with people. So supervision plans, unlike the CSWA plans, which are generally only approved once a month, your supervision plans, which will change, you likely won't stay with the same supervisor the whole licensing process, whether because you get a different position, your supervisor moves away, all kinds of reasons. But the supervision plans, those are approved as they come in, so usually within a week or two. Any questions on this section? We're going to go into it a bit more, so let's see. Your supervision plan. Okay, so your supervisor themselves needs to be approved by the board. The board has a whole list of approved supervisors. Let's see. So we talked a bit about, I think we talked about both sides of these actually.
There was a question around if medical social work jobs come with supervision more often than non-medical social work jobs.
That's a great question. Yeah, I would say that they do. I worked at the VA for a decade, and I had supervision through the VA. I have friends over at OHSU, and they have it there. I would say most hospitals will, most large clinics will. I have supervised people that are in like an integrative health clinic, and those places generally do not. But because of how the practice is structured, they're more likely to have funding to pay for supervision outside of the clinic. Okay. Big places like Central City Concern, LifeWorks, Cascadia, the big places, Central City Concern and Cascadia, actually all three of those, they all have stipends for supervision. And I believe they also all offer supervision in-house. So they give people both options.
There was a question whether you needed to be supervised by an LCSW, just clarifying, not an LMFT or LPC.
Yeah, you do. It's really unfortunate actually because LPCs and LMFTs are amazing with their clinical skills. So it needs to be a social worker, can be a psychologist for 50 of the hours, and I believe it can be a psychiatrist for 50 of the 100 hours, but not an LPC or an LMFT, unfortunately. However, down the road, if you yourself become a supervisor, a social work supervisor, you can supervise LPC interns and LMFT interns. It's just not reciprocal for some reason. Okay, let's move forward here. All right, approve plan, approve supervisor. So we talked about this a bit. The board will approve both of these. Your admin supervisor will sign off on your plan. It'd be great if your admin supervisor and your clinical supervisor at least know each other so they can kind of chat. If you need extra support, like let's say you can't figure out documentation or some kind of requirement at your agency, it'd be great if your clinical supervisor can help you do that. I did want to touch briefly on what is an approved work site, since that is on your plan. There's a new thing happening in Portland, which is more places opening up as like private practices or group practices. It's just started happening maybe within the last 5 years or so. And there's a lot more opportunity for a CSWA to work in a very small private practice. However, the board really wants to make a distinction between it being you and one other clinician who you just basically work under them. That wouldn't be approved. But an agency where it's a group of people, they're all practicing under the same name, they do the same billing system, same documentation, the whole thing. The board wants to make a distinction between those two. Most people end up going into an agency though, a larger agency. I don't think this is too much of a concern. But I did make a note that CSWAs can open a private practice because this is not something I knew until somebody approached me about a year ago and had me help them start a private practice. But the board will let you start a private practice, which is really exciting. LPC interns do it, LMFT interns do it, so it makes sense that we do it. I can share more info about this at a separate time because I didn't want us to get too far off track. But I wanted you to know that that's an option. If you do that, you do have to still do supervision for it, of course, and it needs to be a separate supervisor or separate supervision section than your main place of employment. And it needs to be 2 sessions a month. The hours in that private practice, both clinical and supervision hours, don't count towards your license. I don't know why, but they don't. So you would really be doing it as a labor of love to learn the nuts and bolts of business, to establish your name, your brand, if you think of it that way, and to get to do more of what you love. So like I have people who work in like a main agency, and that's where they're doing all of their supervision and getting paid and their benefits. But then they open up a private practice on the side where they just like specialize for 1 day a week in like providing sex therapy. And that's like a fun way for them to kind of balance out these different roles. So let's move into supervision itself, what to expect. Let's see. So when you do your supervision sessions, it's one part education, one part support, reflection, kind of helping you hold up a mirror to yourself to see where you might get triggered or where you might feel over-identification with the client, and then one part case consults, which ends up being a lot of the both, because the whole purpose of supervision is to help you do better services, do better work. So you never want it to be all support, and you move away from like the actual cases. You never would want it to be all case consultation, where you're never looking at, hey, I'm dealing with this huge medical issue and it's making it hard to do my work. You really want this like nice balanced approach. Okay, So I put in, I think here, a contract. Okay. I just wanted you guys to see, this is what my contract, well, this is what it looked like a year ago. I've updated it since. But most supervisors will have a contract, especially if they're doing this in private practice. But also if you're getting a supervisor at your agency, even if they don't have a contract, I would want to know these things. Like I'd want to know what's your specialty, what are like your intentional practices, how often are you going to meet with me, how will we run our sessions, what's our confidentiality look like, can I use the client's full name, will you be looking at the client's chart notes or not looking at them. I really want you all to feel empowered to have clinical supervision be really this intentional practice that gives you so much support and so much help. Let's see, this is my second page of my supervision agreement. So if you're getting it in the community, you want to know upfront what the cost is. You want to know how you're paying for it. If it's reimbursed through your agency, you want to have that set up beforehand so you don't think it's being reimbursed, but then it wasn't reimbursed. You want to know, like, if I miss a session, what's the penalty? You want to know, you'll see here under your duties, you want to know what your supervisor is expecting of you, and you want to know what you can expect of them. I have a section on here you'll see under evaluations, and we'll get to that because the way the board, once they've gotten your CSWA plan approved, your current hours, then they keep track of your hours through these 6-month evaluations, which might be, this is just an example of different supervision goals. So I really encourage people to, have their supervisor, know them really well, and also have specific goals. So all of the people I work with, we all do the common factors work, which I showed you at the very beginning of this deliberate practice of authenticity, unconditional positive regard, empathy, all that. But I also encourage all of them to choose at least one modality that they want to get really good at. So for some people, that's like polyvagal theory and therapy. For some people, it's internal family systems. Those are some of my favorites, of course. But it could be CBT, DBT, whatever thing that you love. I would choose one and stick to it for a year so you get really good at it. Let's see. Okay, and then this is just a bit more to think about what you need in supervision and what you're getting from it, and kind of use it intentionally. And if you go to supervision and you just say, I don't know what to talk about at all, let your supervisor know and they can kind of guide the session too. In my sessions, if people are, so overwhelmed from work or they're exhausted, or a lot of people I'm supervising right now are so maxed out, and they'll let me know they want me to kind of take the lead. Well, often a great default is just kind of running through your caseload and kind of looking at what it's like, or running through your schedule so that your supervisor kind of knows what it's like to be you and what it's like to be you doing this work and what your clients are like and how the relationship is and how it's all coming together. 6-month evaluation. So I'm going to give you an example of this. This is how the board keeps track of your hours. You can keep track of your hours through a simple Excel spreadsheet. Some people just kind of take a week and they estimate the percentage of time. Usually it's not more than 50% of your time that you're spending in direct clinical services. Some people will take a day at the end of every workday and they'll add up the hours that they were providing, like a session. So it's up to you. The board leaves that up to you to decide how you want to keep track of your hours. But every 6 months, they won't queue you, but you are expected to turn in a 6-month report. And there's a 30-day grace period from the end of when it's done. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Does anybody have questions about how to track your hours? I know that's something that people wonder about sometimes.
There's no questions right now in the chat, but if anyone can certainly unmute and ask.
Okay. I know I'm going through a lot really quickly, but hopefully it's making sense.
I have a question.
Great.
Yeah, so are we supposed to be really exact with our hours, or how does that? I don't really understand how it works.
Yeah. And the board doesn't give specifics. They don't say, hey, we want every day for you to write down your hours or every month. So there's a wide range. Some people will take like a week and kind of just eyeball it, just guess. And like I said, some people will write down every day. So it's up to you. If you underestimate it, the board kind of has an estimate or an average range, and they're mostly just checking to see if those hours fall within that range. And if they don't, they'll reach out and say, hey, these seem super low or these seem super high. Can you double check your numbers? I think the best practice would just to be have a spreadsheet, and I'm trying to think.
Is this the 100 hours, or that's supervision?
Yes, the 100 is supervision. This is your direct clinical hours. I'm glad that you just clarified that, actually.
Yeah, thank you for.
Yeah, clarified that. So I think I actually have it on the next slide, but they want you to have clinical hours. So you'll see it on the next slide.
Okay, thank you.
3,500 hours total, and that can be just 3,500 hours that you're at work. Of that they want 2,000 hours of clinical services. Those are done really in person, over the phone, anything that you're doing directly for the person that you're working with. So for most folks, that ends up being around 50% of the hours that you're doing your work. But if you're at a place that's like LifeWorks, where you're just in a clinic all day, you'll very easily be able to know, hey, I did 25 sessions this week. That was 25 hours. That kind of setting will simplify it. If you're doing case management, you'll want to get kind of like a better estimate of your time and hours. Let's see. Okay, so every 6 months, without the board cueing you, so just put this in your calendar, you're going to turn in this. It's a 2-page form. I'll show you the second page in a second. But you'll see at the top here, you'll put in your total work hours. You'll put in your direct client hours. You'll put in your individual supervision hours, and then your group hours. And you're going to mark off which report this is and the reporting period, which they'll give you the very first start date when they approve your CSWA. So you're ideally, you sit down with your supervisor and you guys fill this out together, but people do this all kinds of different ways. You describe your sessions, choose a theory or therapy, evaluate your strengths and weaknesses. This is one I really do think would be the best to do with your supervisor. Look at your professional growth, and then describe your goals for the next 6 months. I've never seen the boards say, hey, you didn't fill this out right. So I don't know what their bare minimum requirements or expectations are, but just do your best and try and use this as like a tool for your own deliberate practice. Then on the second page, your supervisor fills out these boxes. Are you talking about ethics? Are you talking about the board's statutes and rules? Are you going over cases? Are you understanding diagnosing and treatment planning? Are there any concerns? This one really should be addressed all along the way. If there's any concerns, your supervisor should be bringing this up in the moment they see it or the next session. Then your supervisor signs off on this, you sign off on it, and you send it in. Pretty soon, we'll be sending this in by online. We used to all fax them in. Now you can email them in. That's what I recommend. It's much faster. But these are what you'll do every 6 months, and this is how you'll figure out your hours. If you have a separate individual and group supervisor, you will do 2 of these, but the board just wants your hours on one of them. Let's see. Okay, here's the hours. Yes. Any questions about hours? So They're pretty straightforward.
Well, I do. Again, this is Janelle again. Hi. Yeah, so how long does this usually take? About 2 years to get? Or because 3,500, that's a lot of hours.
Yes, so it can't take less than 2 years. That's for sure. It won't be approved if you took less than 2 years. The average person takes probably 3 years because of job changes, because of like health issues, because of all reasons. What I said earlier was that if you did 4 hours of supervision every single month and you had no interruptions in your work, then you would complete this in 2 years. But if you did 2 hours of supervision a month, it would take 4 years. It can't take more than 5 years, or you have to kind of pay a fee again. But I don't think it usually takes people more than 5 years, unless there's some extenuating circumstances. Hours, exam. Oh, this is hours. Okay. I wanted you to know that you should check in with the board frequently. So if you haven't heard back from the board, if you submitted something, you haven't heard back, email them. If you leave your job, you need to let the board know. They mostly want all changes reported to them within 10 days. So new address, new name, new job, new clinical supervisor, new admin supervisor, all of any changes. They want to know within about 10 days. So just try and get in the habit of emailing them and checking in with them. If I can't reach them by email, then I call, and they're really helpful. Sometimes it's helpful if you're having communication problems to ask your supervisor to help communicate, because most supervisors have had a lot more interaction with the board, so they're just more familiar with it, and sometimes that just makes it go better. I think Wendy Thatcher's email, actually, this is from last year. Hers now is Oregon.gov. They all updated their email addresses. So if you're writing down Wendy's, it's Oregon.gov. And when I share this PowerPoint, I'll update that for you. So you've got your employment, you have your supervisor, your supervision plan, you've been accruing all of these hours. Once you've accrued a certain number of hours, at least 75 supervision hours, then, and you've practiced for 2 years, then you contact the board, you let them know, they send you approval, you can register for the ASWE national exam, take the exam. When you have all of your paperwork in, then you send that all to the board. I think that's my next slide here. You send in to the board your final plan, your exam score, your application, a lot of money. They said that they don't always require another criminal background check. And you submit it to the board, and then they approve it. And then your interactions with the board are mostly every 2 years when you renew your license and update them on your continuing ed credit. So there are a few resources I wanted to make sure you know about. There's a Portland Clinical Supervision Facebook group where people ask questions like this. They look for supervisors there. They ask for updates about the board, all of that. I have a link right here for agencies that have supervision. It's on my website. And then I wanted to just take you to the board's website and give you an overview. Unlike when I got my license, where everything feels like it was super rudimentary, there's so much online now. The board has done an amazing job getting almost everything you need online. So you're going to want to bookmark their website on your browser for the next few years. And you'll see these different sections: licensing, board, compliance, and resources. You see down here, Oregon LCSW approved supervisors. You can check down there. This is where you'll go when you're ready to take your exam. Let's see. These are your social work licenses. This is the board information. And this is the one you're going to use a lot. Clinical social work associate information. So let me just show you what's here. I want you to feel really familiar with this and comfortable with it and just realize it's super straightforward. Here's your application. If you are stepping away from a job for more than a few weeks, they want you to inactivate your CSWA. That's just simply sending them one of those 6-month reports that I just showed you, so they know what hours you've gotten. And then when you're ready to reactivate it, you just send them another form and they'll do it. And there's no cost to reactivate it, unless it's every year that you're doing your CSWA, you do pay a fee. I have people do this, like I just had somebody go on FMLA because of having to stay at home full time now. They can't do their job and take care of their children, so their work granted FMLA. So they inactivated their CSWA through the board. I had somebody else do it because they were having health issues. People do it for maternity or paternity leaves. But just keep the board updated. Some people will switch jobs and not let the board know, and then the board retroactively inactivates their CSWA, and then you renew it. But they really like to be on top of everything. You'll see there's a bunch of frequently asked questions. If you have these questions today, we can talk about it. But they've done a really good job trying to anticipate what you might be needing or any questions that you have. And then I wanted to show you as well the board meetings. So when you're sending in all of your application and everything, the board meets once a month. Usually it's the 3rd week of the month. You can check here. This will show you when they're meeting. And it'll also show you, they say allow 2 to 4 weeks of processing. When they know their next meeting date, they'll also give you the date that they want your paperwork in by. So they have their meeting date, but you need to submit your paperwork in advance for these approvals. There's also, if you go to this page, then you'll see if yours was approved. So let's say you're super eager to find out and you don't want to wait for a few days or whatever, where they send you an email approving it. You can just go keep your eyes on the website and check their approval and click on this link and it will show you the list. I also wanted to make sure that you know where the ORS exam is. So I mentioned at the beginning that one of the things that you do when you're applying is you take the ORS exam, which I don't remember the acronym right now. But it's the rules and statutes, basically, for the state of Oregon. So let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Okay. Like I said, you do this at the beginning when you do your CSWA, and then you do it every 5 years. And I believe the printouts, I'll have to look and find the printout for you because I don't want you guys to have to wait while I do this. But what you will end up doing is going through all of these statutes that are through the Secretary of State, and that's where your answers are going to be. It's an open book exam. You can do it with other people. I know a few colleagues and I got together and did this when we did it initially. But this is where you're going to find the answers. So I wanted to make sure you saw that. And then, okay, yeah. Lastly, I wanted to summarize, the supervision process is such a great opportunity for clinical growth. It's when you can make all of your mistakes. I mean, you'll make mistakes your whole career. But it's when there's so much support and help that's really built into this nice time in your professional development. I really want you all to take advantage of that and to realize it's 2 pieces. It's not just kind of checking boxes and jumping through hoops, but it's this wonderful incubation period. I want you to remember it's just basically 4 steps. There are, levels to each of those steps, but it's pretty straightforward. And then you're welcome to reach out to me for additional questions or support or help. And that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? Is anyone still there?
Thank you so much, Ariana. Yes, this is great. If anyone has questions, this is a great time to just unmute yourself if you want to start your camera. It seems like Tony had a question.
Yeah, I can ask it too.
Yeah,
I
go
guess
for
I
it,
just
Tony,
popped
that'd be
on here.
great.
Sorry. Ariana, I'm just curious, like if you're jumping the gun a little bit, but like presumptively, if we're a LCSW in Oregon, and then we want to practice in say like California or Washington or something like that, is it simply how do we go about obtaining? Can we just practice there? Do we have to get a license, just take the test and pay the fees, or how does that look?
Yeah, you'll have to get a license for each state that you practice in, and each state has different rules and requirements and a different governing body. So Washington runs their licenses through the Department of Health, and so you'll want to check with each state where you're anticipating working or before you move there.
Okay.
You're going to want to get the license first. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait a few months. But some people will work on a license concurrently. I supervise people who do Oregon and Washington at the same time, especially like in Vancouver, so that they can try and meet as much of both licenses requirements as possible, so they don't have to go back. Washington's requirements are higher than Oregon's. So if you're doing your Oregon one, it's nice to know that the Washington ones are higher, so you try and meet them as you go. Versus like I did my Oregon one and then my Washington one, so I had to retroactively like catch up and do more supervision hours and more clinical work hours.
Okay, so you could, so in the Washington, Oregon example, you'd get a person could get licensed here in Oregon, and then if we wanted to practice in Washington, we'd have to add on whatever additional standards are needed to meet their requirements.
Yeah, that's right. I have a page on my website that talks about how to get it in Washington once you've done Oregon's, but basically Washington just requires 30 more hours of clinical supervision. They require AIDS training, maybe suicide prevention training, and I think maybe 3 years of clinical practice.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. And then of course you have to pay your fees for both.
Of course.
Just a total pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I have a question. Well, actually, I should let you say. I'm wondering when you were talking about the actual activities we're doing. So I'm one of the people going into medical social work. I'm doing medical social work and I'm doing some discharge planning and some clinical one-on-one time and doing all different things. Mm-hmm. How much of that counts towards? I think you mentioned it and I just caught the end of what you were saying and I knew I'd have to come back to that.
Yeah, so I think Marina will also share with you the Randy's PowerPoint from the Oregon board, but he has a slide that defines direct clinical practice, and you'll see by how short it is that it's super vague. But they say direct clinical work is described as those clinical experience hours that are therapeutic or a combination of assessment and subsequent therapeutic interactions in person or through electronic communication. So it mostly needs to be in person. It needs to be focused on a goal that the person has, and somewhat clinical in nature, right? Like it wouldn't be if your goal is always just to get somebody food benefits, but you never work on their mental health, you never work on their addiction, you never work on anything else, then that wouldn't be considered as clinical. But mostly any discharge planning, any assessment, any treatment goals, those all count.
I'm planning on working in hospice or a palliative care arena, so even family, I mean, it's all clinical support. So
yeah, it's on behalf of the client's well-being, and
right.
That's considered clinical. Yeah.
Not
Thanks.
Just that there's a lot of comments in the chat saying just thank you so much. This is so helpful. I really appreciate the help and the guidance. Thanks for sharing your expertise. One student mentioned just that there's a lot and just feeling a little bit over.
I know. I feel so bad. I felt overwhelmed. Like I mentioned, reading Randy's PowerPoint this morning, so I know how you feel. I think it's also just getting a lot of information at once that creates that sensation. But once you just get started on the steps, it'll kind of smooth itself out. I'd say the first month is when it feels the most complicated for people, but once they get started on supervision, for most people, it's pretty smooth.
How do you go about searching for somebody to? So I just got a job in a small hospice company, and I'm per diem, so that means I get paid per client that I go and see, and so I'm just not, and I'm the only social worker, so I know that they're not going to provide supervision for me, and I just don't really know how to go about finding somebody.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest challenges people have. Unfortunately, there's not a great directory created yet for that, but I think at some point there will be. So the Oregon's board has a list. You probably saw me go over that. They have a list of everybody, but that doesn't show you, what the people do. It doesn't show you if they're still actively providing supervision. The Facebook group that I showed on my resource slide, that's where a lot of clinical supervisors are and a lot of clinical supervisees are. So you can go on there and say, hey, this is exactly what my situation is. Who works in this? Who's interested? It's common for hospice social workers to be the only social worker. I supervise people in that. But if you have other colleagues and other hospice places, word of mouth is a really good way to get somebody who's a good fit.
Okay.
But those are the main places. You can also check Psychology Today. A lot of clinical supervisors list themselves on Psychology Today.
Okay. Thank you.
And that'll give you more of a description of what kind of therapy and stuff they do.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anything that somebody is like the most overwhelming piece at this point or the most confusing part?
Ariana, I can't remember if this came up. I might have missed it. You might have covered this. But a question that I get a lot from students is just like, for those hours of direct service work, clinical work, what exactly counts as direct service work? Does it be kind of in a counseling type role? Could it be more creative? Just kind of like any direct service? What kind of jobs?
Yeah, I think Dee, your name's Dee, right? Yeah, Dee was asking about that too. So it really, your having a role that's defined as a clinical role goes a long way with the board, and making sure it's defined as that helps. And then as long as what you're doing is formulated somewhat around a treatment plan, then it's going to count, especially your individual in-person interactions, or of course like a group therapy setting. But if you're providing alternative treatment approaches, those will count. Like I have somebody who helps some of their clients who are experiencing lack of housing do online workshops just for arts and crafts and things like that. Those count as well. If the whole focus is on some treatment goal, like getting housing, improving mental health, recovering from trauma, recovering from addiction. So it's really what's it based around? What's the purpose of the interaction? So same if you're calling their family to get their family on board with a goal or bring them in for more support.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other common questions that you get, Marina? I'm trying to think of if there's others.
One thing that I guess I would just share from the school's perspective, a question that I get a lot from students is whether they have to pursue the clinical concentration to then later on pursue the LCSW. And we offer 4 concentrations in the school: clinical, children, youth, and families, practice and leadership with communities and organizations, and health across the lifespan. And you can pursue any of those concentrations and then still later on pursue your LCSW. So just wanting to make that really clear. You can do any concentration and still have the LCSW option. Though I have heard, and I don't know if this is myth or real, but I have heard in California that they do require you to have done the clinical concentration coursework in your MSW program. So I don't know if that's true. It's something to look into, essentially call the California State Licensing Board if you're thinking about moving to California.
Yeah, I would say that if you are thinking of moving, it's much easier to like get a clinical license somewhere else if you have your full license in one state already versus like going with half of it done. So if you're like 6 months away and you're wanting to move, it would still be worth it to finish it, even if you finish it in another state. Let's see, somebody asked, do you have recommendations of when I should start this process? Oh, I see. Near the end of my first year, should I begin this during my 3rd year? Yes. I would just start it unless you have a very complicated legal background, which will take, like 6 months to figure out. I would just start it like a month or 2 months before you graduate. So you could start now. If it doesn't make you feel too stressed. Yeah. Great. Well, I think that's
clarifying.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Hema, and I was wondering, I heard something about a temporary CSWA, never heard of that before, but you're saying that is not necessarily required to do, but the CSWA itself is required for the LCSW. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm glad that you clarified. So the temporary CSWA is not required. It used to be a useful tool to have in your back pocket when you apply for jobs, and now most places don't need it, except I can't remember who clarified, maybe it was Thomas, that a medical setting is more likely to require a temporary CSWA. All the temporary CSWA does is it gives you a license number. It doesn't give you a license to practice. So it's just to satisfy your employer who says, I have to check this box or I can't bring you on board. And with that, what I had mentioned before is if a place of employment requires it, contacts the board first and they'll likely reach out to the employer. But yes, a CSWA is what you have to get as kind of like the first piece of getting a full LCSW or full licensed clinical social work to practice. So there's no bypassing that line. Great.
Well, Ariana, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it so much. And I know that you are, just have such great information. And I really appreciate you putting yourself out there for students to contact, to reach out to. So please, we talk a lot in the School of Social Work about your professional network and connecting with folks. And so hopefully Ariana is one of those folks that you'll be able to connect with moving forward. Dee Dee, it looks like maybe you were going to ask a question.
No, I was just going to say thanks. It is overwhelming right now with, for those of us that are coming up on graduation and with COVID, and just things seem really zany right now. And it helps to have a game plan, like a bit of a map, and it's good timing. So thanks for putting it together. It's been really helpful. Yeah. And I'm going to probably need the recording too. Thank you.
I was going to say, use the recording and go back and look at it. And, the PowerPoints, I think both mine and Randy's will help too to kind of clarify some of this.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to stop the recording.